the US Navy has conducted, and it's very difficult for me as someone who's not a US Navy person to believe that all of that work was, not classified.
Well, they didn't do nuclear work here per se. This was not the nuclear, I don't want to use that term nuclear, let's just say radiological work.
Right.
Work involving radioisotopes. Most of that work, the lion's share of that work was done at Hunters Point Shipyard. The Navy Radiological Defense Laboratory, NRDL, worked from 1948 to 1968, and their headquarters was on Hunters Point. And they governed the activities of the rest of the bases with regard to radiological R&D and so forth. This was mainly a schoolhouse. Okay, so it was mainly training. But the training that was done here was not cutting edge training. It was training to 18-year-old seaman recruits that were just fresh out of boot camp. Okay? And there were some more advanced schools too, called C schools instead of A schools, that took first-class petty officers and trained them on equipment and so forth. But this was basic radiological training in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s to the standards of the day. There was nothing Gee-Whiz-Bang that went on at Treasure Island. There was nothing, it would be more interesting if that were the case. This basically was training, administration, but they did have a lot of training that did go on with radiological equipment, calibrating it and so forth, and some damage control that involved that. Yeah, there really wasn't anything here that was of that nature. Now, Hunters Point, different story. And Mare Island, Nuclear Naval Shipyard, different story.
Okay. I beg to differ with that. You said in the meetings before that the Bikini Atoll ships were not, and then you guys turned it around and said that they were in fact docked here at the very least. You also don't know where any of the metal from the other pandemonium, which I noticed you did skip over. Pandemonium one side is actually, we kind of crossed over this.
I didn't skip over it, but the pandemonium.
No, but you can't say that there was, I mean, that radium spill from building 233
yes.
was significant.
Yes.
Okay, so in you saying that there really wasn't much, and we were teaching 18-year-olds, and you can only speak to him because he's an engineer in a certain way, what does that say to this gentleman who's not an engineer but is very intelligent? Are you going to change your tone when you speak to him? You've got to stop this. This is part of the problem. Because there was significant amount of radiation and a ton of other things. I mean, you have nuclear regulators coming onto the island to check that. You have buildings right now that held a huge amount of material. And you're not telling people the truth. I'm sorry, but you are not.
Okay.
And I
well,
can
Catherine,
gladly do thorough research in which I can go toe-to-toe with each one of you. In fact, I still have spots around my house, and Patricia McFadden knows it, Bob Beck knows it, you know it, and my area, which you also didn't talk about, the pieces that you found in and around there, you eliminate things that you don't want people to know about.
No, that's not true, Catherine. I really have to stop you at that point.
And
your implications are just so off the mark.
And I said
the fact of the matter is, I actually had 15 minutes over on the tour, and I wanted to actually take this first tour and wanted to make it 60 to 90 minutes. It wasn't meant in any way, shape, or form to be comprehensive.
You stated
and I really think
that these burn pits also received garbage from other areas around the bay. So do not sit here and say that we have a minimal. You are obscuring the truth about what could be here, what is still here. And if none of you have come back around Bayside Drive to find those pieces that I have two separate scientists come and check out, they're significant, but you're missing them. Why? Because you don't want to hear me. Just as on the bus, you heard the people behind me ask you questions and answer, but you suddenly didn't hear me. There's Ohlone tribal remains that need to be returned to YBI from the bridge thing. I mean, there's a ton of things. And then when I ask you a question, you say that's Titus' deal. Titus says that's John Stewart's deal. John Stewart says it's your deal. You say it's the city's deal. Nobody takes responsibility. And all the while, making it seem as if it's nothing at all. Well, I have a lot of proof that it is something at all in your own words, and you're kicking up dust and you're admitting that these piles and this action is kicking up more dust, and that this building has asbestos, but somehow magically the one next door with the people living in it has nothing wrong with it. While you kicked me out for 3 months for asbestos and mold remediation, while my neighbor supposedly doesn't have a thing wrong with his unit. And then you try to talk it down and you try to talk over people like me.
No, Catherine, as a matter of fact, I think people here can vouch for the fact that I didn't talk about asbestos in the residences at all in the bus tour, and had no intention of doing it.
Actually, all of you have in the bad meetings. And you just, yes, you did. In fact, I have it on video. You sat there and said that they were being torn down for asbestos, and then you're reusing
No, I didn't say they were torn down for
products that could be
asbestos. I said
reused in
part of the
other
process
buildings.
is to actually do asbestos abatement prior to the demolition is what I said, because that's a
Regardless,
necessary
it's
component before you
there.
actually take the building down.
It's there.
A
We're
very big
living
difference
in it.
between what I said and what you think I said.
We're living in it.
Thank you.
And you've already done a whole piece in the RAD meetings on asbestos remediation. And that's why you tore a lot of those buildings down in front, and you have complete data sets on how much was present. And then you kicked that up into the wind, and you kicked it up into our neighborhoods over our faces. And then you want to sit here and say that it's not a significant issue.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Does anyone else have a question?
Exactly. Please, you really should by this point.
All right, listen, I want to thank you very much for coming to the
Hold on,
feedback.
I got a
I
question.
appreciate it. Thank you, we're adjourned.
But you're not going to take my question?